always happy to give you a quick update on Braingrade. So I talked to you guys last year with a relatively mysterious presentation that I think involved a black box where our product should have been. This year, I'm excited to be able to show off a little bit more about what it is we've been building over the last year, talk a little bit about what we've been up to, and now we're actually in proper fundraising mode. So ask for money, I guess. Yeah. So with that, I'll jump into a pretty quick presentation on where we're at now. You are the collection of your memories, but Alzheimer's disease eats away at those memories, taking away a patient's sense of self and their independence. But I don't need to spend time probably telling you this, because you've likely already experienced somebody with Alzheimer's disease yourself, given that 1 in 4 people die with it. Looking around this room, 20 of us. And despite that, there is no cure and no effective treatment. And patients and physicians both hate current treatment options that are available now. Over 50% of patients actually stop taking existing treatments and pharmaceuticals within the first year. And the National Institute for Clinical Excellence actually suggested that we stop reimbursing these because they just don't do enough. Now, hopefully, or finally, there is hope in device-based therapies, even for disorders such as Alzheimer's disease. And the results of these pharmaceuticals that we just talked about are actually reflected in clinical trial work as well. Current clinical trials for drugs show only 1% of pharmaceuticals actually end up making any sort of positive impact on human patients when they make it into clinical trials. But an analysis of device-based therapies for Alzheimer's disease show that 88% of device-based therapies actually show positive results in humans. So this feasibility work has actually painted a landscape that suggests that our device will provide patients with 10 or more years of additional independence, allowing them to stay out of expensive institutional care and spend more time with their friends and family as loved ones, instead of as a caretaking burden. And now is the right time for device-based therapies as well. The medical device market is well established. We have devices for things like heart disease and even other neurodegenerative diseases such as Parkinson's disease, but nothing yet for Alzheimer's disease. Well, not quite yet. And that's why we have developed, or are developing, the first implant built for Alzheimer's disease. The device is fully invisible once it's implanted under the skin and works like a pacemaker for your brain. Now, what do I mean by that? What the device does is detects the abnormal signals associated with Alzheimer's disease and stimulates to stabilize and correct them. And since I'm talking to an expert crowd and not just an investment team, I can say that what we're looking for primarily here, the new metric that Braingrade is trying to measure, is synchrony, coherence between brain regions. So by having a multi-probe device that reaches into disparate targets in the brain, we can measure interregional communication and try to modify that at long distances between brain structures. And this has some really awesome results. Of course, it restores memory function and allows patients to remain independent longer, but it also has these secondary benefits as well, such as a reduction of tau, a slowing down of brain atrophy, and an increase in neurogenesis, formation of new neurons. Now, we have a more detailed science deck available that actually goes into all of this in a lot more detail. But I think for now, it's important to highlight that what we're talking about here is not preclinical work translated into human clinical trials or something that we hope will be translated. This is where all the Alzheimer's therapies have failed up to this point. This is why drugs have had such a hard time. And what these drugs struggle with is that they're focusing on these molecular mechanisms that really differ between how the animal models work and how human patients actually function and what their molecular chemistry looks like. But with a device-based therapy like this, we're actually talking about human-to-human translation. This work has all been done in human studies and published in peer-reviewed journals. Device-based therapies for Alzheimer's disease work. And they're more likely to continue working in a wide swath of patients because we don't have to be so concerned about those molecular underpinnings. The biological chemistry associated with this disease can differ between patients because we're operating on the function of memory, the oscillatory activity in the brain. Now, these scientific results are cool and exciting, but sometimes I feel like a good anecdote is actually what really gives you the idea of what a therapy like this is like. It's easy to look at a Parkinson's patient and watch them stop a tremor, but hearing about psychiatric disorders or something like Alzheimer's disease gives you, quotes like this kind of give a new light to that. So this patient here, which participated in one of the first studies on deep brain stimulation for Alzheimer's disease, said, when this thing turned on, my eyes opened up. The light was turned on. It was like, wow. It was like a comfort I had just been taking, that big, deep breath that I had been longing for so long. I think it's hard for us to imagine what living with Alzheimer's disease is like, but I think something like this can show how much hope can be given by therapies like this one. Now, this was done actually with an existing off-the-shelf deep brain stimulator. But like I said, ours is the first device to be developed for Alzheimer's disease, meaning that it has functions that cater towards Alzheimer's disease and that interregional communication and synchrony that I talked about. Our device has closed-loop simulation, can approach the brain as a network, meaning that it can aggregate data from disparate targets, functions in high resolution, which I'll expand upon in a second, and is driven by a machine learning algorithm that actually helps the device adapt to the changing brain state of the Alzheimer's patient over time. So one of the first innovations that we've worked on, and it's one of the main points of progress we've made in the last year, are the development of our implantable probes. We're working with thin film electrodes that we're putting into deep brain targets. This allows us to pack more electrodes into the same size implantation that's standard in today's deep brain stimulation leads. This gives us finer control over stimulation area and stimulation activation volume, while also allowing them to displace a lower volume of brain tissue overall. And what we're showing here is actually some of the first clinical data that or preclinical data that we've produced this year, which is accelerated aging studies of our electrodes, showing that these thin film electrodes, which can reach deep brain targets, are lasting over 10 years. We're also making advances in what these interfaces look like. So instead of the annular contacts or ring electrodes that a lot of us are familiar with, we wanted to take a 2D structure, like a thin film electrode, and allow it to access a 3D volume. So what we're doing is splaying the electrodes as they reach the deep brain target. This allows us a much greater control over what the stimulation volume and shape will be, and also corrects for any sort of errors that exist in neurosurgery. Some of the targets we're aiming for are very small, actually smaller than the error rate of deep brain stimulation surgery right now. And this allows us to correct for that by creating a stimulation volume that surrounds our target. And of course, the point of those other two things is to deliver our patented stimulation algorithms. So we have 3 patents in how we stimulate the brain in Alzheimer's disease patients. And these are actually suggested in Nature Reviews Neurology as the future of deep brain stimulation. And like I mentioned, this is all backed by our AI and software machine learning back end, which is capable of learning not just from the individual patient, but also from populations of patients, looking at how we can improve our therapy over time in group. And one of the things this does for us is allow us to get more information during clinical trials. So traditional Alzheimer's clinical trials right now are so rough for many reasons, one of them being that you can only check in on the patient so often. So the patient comes into the clinic once every few months and does some sort of cognitive test that's super subjective, and then you're trying to plot these like scores that vary due to how much coffee the patient had or how much they slept that day, and you have 4 data points. Our goal is to back up that traditional mechanism so we can compare ourselves to other studies with more frequent app-based memory games so that we can actually monitor the patient's memory performance over time and get a daily check-in to how the device is functioning, or even second-by-second check-in. And part of that is possible because we're actually monitoring a biomarker. We have a good biomarker of functioning memory. And so we can look at that on a continuous basis and ensure that our therapies are working. Now, everything that I've just talked to you about is some big developments in the neurotech space, but I think we've built up a team that's had experience in this type of work. I'm not going to go through every point on this slide. It's mostly here to say, yes, we can do it because we've done all of these other things before. We hired the team around this tech that can make it possible. Speaking of team, We have an excellent management team. So this is our founding team. We have our CEO, Peter Schlecht, a serial entrepreneur that I co-founded the company with. Myself, previously at BlackRock Microsystems. Christian Hauptmann, who is the head of neuromodulation at Jülich and who powers some of the patents behind Medtronic's deep brain stimulators. Rob Edgington was the co-founder of Paradromics. Harvey Sohal was the head of neuroscience at Paradromics. And Felix Diku is the director of microfabrication at Neuralink. And we're backed by an even larger kind of back-end team, including an extended team of part-time researchers that range from memory scientists to ASIC developers, neurologists, and neurosurgeons, and key scientific advisors, including people who've headed large med device companies who brought operational med device to Europe, AI experts, neurosurgeons, BCI experts, and memory scientists. And we are working on the most expensive disease in the United States. Now here's the big slide where you show the huge numbers, right? We keep talking about how these numbers are crawling up and up. Alzheimer's disease is the most expensive disease in the United States. It costs $1 trillion today, and that's expected to triple over the next 10 years. 1 in every 4 Medicare dollars is spent on Alzheimer's disease, just to show how big the problem is. And of course, I can say these big numbers and I can show off these huge markets, but I think what's really important to highlight here is that Alzheimer's disease is so well studied that we actually understand the health economics of it really, really well. So health economics is something normally a company would engage on when they're getting close to market. We already have health economics consultants, and we already have, or we don't have, but the field has published papers on what the health economics for Alzheimer's disease looks like and deep brain stimulation for Alzheimer's disease looks like. And it's super favorable. The bar is so low. You only need to work 80% of the time and delay the patient's institutional care by 1 year. And you're both clinically and economically more viable than anything on the market. And this is why the market reacts so well to good Alzheimer's news. I think some of us are probably familiar with Biogen's aducanumab or Aduhelm news earlier this year. Their stock saw a $20 billion valuation that day. So where are we at now? It's 2021. We have about 2 years of device development in front of us before we put our version 1 device into our next clinical trial. Then we have an additional development period before starting our pivotal trial and going for CE mark in Europe. What we've done over the last few months is something I kind of just updated you on, but we've developed our thin film electrodes, put them under preclinical testing and demonstrated excellent lifetime. We've started a human STIM study using our STIM algorithms in human protocol. More important than the results from that is that we established our clinical partners, both in the US and beginning to in Europe. We submitted a breakthrough device designation in the last month. Waiting to hear back on that. And we've recently gotten some funding from both MindRock and IT Fund. So we'd love for you to join us in helping the 44 million people affected by Alzheimer's today. Thank you.
All right, yeah, Nick, if you can just stay up here for a couple minutes, we'll have some questions. Any from the Zoom audience? All right, well, let me ask you this. First of all, very interesting presentation, and yes, thank you for filling in for us at the last minute. Those of you who saw the original agenda, Michael Fink from GlobeTech was actually planning to be here from Europe to present, had an accident and is tied up in the hospital, but I think is watching us. So Michael, we hope you're recuperating, and sorry you weren't able to come, but fortunately we were able to get Nick to fill in, and I'm glad you did, because this is a really definitely a lot more meat than we had a year ago when it was interesting. So my question to you is, I don't know if you were here for our morning panel when we were talking about, and yesterday this came up as well, the influx of cash and investment into the BCI market. Obviously we know what Elon Musk is doing and what Brian Johnson is doing, and Peter Thielman investing in BlackRock. And so the question came up this morning is, hey, can we deliver on this promise? Are we over-promising and under-delivering? What's your and what's Braingrade's reaction to this rush of investment in other BCI companies?
Yeah, I think it's an interesting question, partially because I think what it reflects on is that our company, because we have a lot of the BCI people, and that's where we pulled a lot of our talent from, is seen as a BCI company. And I think in some ways it's attractive to be seen as a BCI company. It sure helps us in hiring, and there's shortage of people applying, which is good for a startup. But in some ways, I prefer to be seen as a med device company focusing on a real med device that has a lot of clinical evidence already. Now, to your point, or to your question, I guess, which is, I think in your question you're asking if there's an overpromise under-deliver in Braingrade, but you may also just be asking.
I meant that more generally,
sure.
Not about you specifically.
Yeah, I mean, my answer to that question this morning in the panel is that I think there is some evidence of the field doing that in general. We talked about BCIs. I mean, not to point fingers at specific people, except for Elon Musk. Being able to do anything you want it to do, right? Drive your Tesla, or play StarCraft, or whatever else is claiming. And so I think there is a general air of overpromising for some of these investments. But overall, I think it's led to investors being a bit more shrewd and a bit more knowledgeable. We're fundraising right now. We get to talk to a ton of investors, which is really cool. And a lot of them actually have kind of specific questions around neurotech. And I think if I had gone out 5-10 years before this,
probably wouldn't have happened.
No.
Yeah, all right, good answer. Let me ask you about another player that you alluded to, which is Lozano's team in Canada. If I'm not mistaken, they failed their clinical trial originally. Do you have any insight as to what went wrong? What's your view of DBS Fornix as a treatment for Alzheimer's?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think it was actually Victor that labeled them as a top 5 clinical trial failures of last year.
Is that true, Victor? Victor is claiming the fifth.
Don't call me out for that. So, I mean, they're on market right now. I made a kind of false claim earlier when I said there's no device developed for Alzheimer's disease. Theirs wasn't developed for Alzheimer's disease because it was off the shelf, but they are on market. So they're CE marked. You can go get an implant for Alzheimer's disease in Europe. They were originally using a Medtronic stimulator, but due to some mediocre results in their first clinical trial, they dropped that strategic partnership, I believe.
Do you think the stimulator was really part of the issue?
No, I don't think the stimulator was part of the issue. Okay. I think there's...
That's not what you were implying.
No, not implying anything about
Medtronic stimulator. Got it.
Because they haven't seen significantly different results, in my opinion, with the Boston stimulator instead. What I think is odd is that if you look at, I mean, Lozano's the most published neurosurgeon in the world, so it's kind of hard to claim this, but if you look at Lozano's other papers, he has a bunch of work that obviously we're relying on that really looks at the applicability of closed loop stimulation being a necessity for Alzheimer's disease and working on the synchrony component. And so to me, it's kind of, I see functional neuromodulation as kind of odd in that they don't actually implement those things in the device yet. And so curious overall what their plan is. But yeah, I think they have not had some great luck in their clinical trials. And I think it's because Fornix single target is not the right solution, and I don't think they think it is either.
Very interesting. Okay. Well, I think what you're saying is stay tuned, fasten your seatbelt, because things are going to get interesting. I think you made a very compelling case economically. Are there any questions from the audience? Okay. If not, Nick, thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you.